What happens after death? Hey, I've just got to tell you something wonderful about our friend Jesus, my best friend and your best friend. He tells us what happens after death. There's so much confusion about this in the world. There are people that think that death is just like a black hole, and when you die, that's it. Only your memory lives on. There are others who think when you die, if you've been good, you might come back as a higher human. If you've been bad, you come back like some type of animal. There are others that are taught that when you die, you go to heaven, or you go to hell, or you go to a place called purgatory to try to get it together and still try to get into heaven. So there are all these ideas about death, but Jesus wants us to be crystal clear on what happens after death and what happens at the resurrection. He says in Ecclesiastes 9:5, the living know that they shall die, but the dead know nothing. The dead don't know anything. If people went to heaven when they died, they'd be praising the Lord. But Psalm 115 verse 17 says, the dead don't praise the Lord, neither have any who have gone down into silence. There are some who say, well, my grandmother appeared to me at the foot of my bed and she's dead. The book of Job tells us when the dead die, they don't go back to the house where they were before. Well, then that raises the question, if the dead are unconscious or asleep unconsciously, then what is all of this other stuff that we see? In the Old Testament, there's an expression called familiar spirits. And what we discover when we study that topic is that when Satan was thrown out of heaven with a third of the angels that were loyal to him, that he now assigns his angels to people who are living so they can become familiar with their lives, so that when they die, that familiar spirit, that fallen angel, that demon can reappear as the dead loved one when the person is most vulnerable and tell him nice things like, I'm up in heaven and I'm with Jesus and I have a message for you, and lead people astray. But the Bible is what tells us that if we ever have that happen, we say, get thee behind me, Satan. That we don't want to have any communication with the dead because they're really fallen angels trying to deceive us, trying to lead us astray and destroy us. So if the dead are dead, then what happens to them? Jesus gave us a little insight into this in John chapter 11. His good friend Lazarus got sick. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, sent word by messenger to Jesus saying, come, you can heal any sickness. But Jesus kept doing what he's doing, helping other people. And when he finally came 4 days later, Lazarus was dead. Mary and Martha said, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. Why did you let him die? And Jesus said, whoever dies in me is not dead forever. And he gave us a little test. He said, where have they laid him? They took him to the place. He said, move the stone from the cave where they buried him. They said, oh, it's 4 days. He smells. Move the stone. They learned to obey Jesus. They moved the stone. And then Jesus said, Lazarus, come out. Come forth. And all of a sudden, new life went into that dead body, and Lazarus began to come out. He said, unwrap the grave, take the grave clothes off of him so that he can live again. Well, there was Lazarus resurrected by Jesus. That was a tiny, tiny little taste of the giant resurrection at the second coming of Jesus. When the Lord comes again, there will be a resurrection like you've never seen before. Jesus said in John 5:28 and 29 that there will actually be two resurrections. Revelation 20 explains that those resurrections are separated by 1,000 years. There's the resurrection of the righteous at the second coming of Jesus, and the resurrection of the wicked 1,000 years later. We'll talk about that in another one of these things. But really, what we need to know is that at the second coming of Jesus, He will raise all of his people. He will wake up his people, and he will transform those of us who are living. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, this mortal will put on immortality, and together we'll fly to meet Jesus in the air. He'll take us on this incredible tour of the solar system and the universe and up into the New Jerusalem. We got to be there. Aren't you glad that Jesus has the keys to death and the grave? That when a person dies, he knows the heart. He knows who would enjoy spending eternity with him, and he will give them a chance to. Aren't you thankful for that? Tell somebody about Jesus today. Tell them something good about him today.